Okay, before you start your isometric spice rack, you're going to want to make sure that you have your workspace set up with the optimal tools to execute this efficiently. So just taking a look at my workspace right now, you'll see that I have my layers nicely open on the right side here, first and foremost. I then have my appearance, stroke, swatches, graphic styles, and symbols panel stacked over one another. Notice that my stroke panel is fully expanded, and if it isn't, what you're going to do is you're going to click on the double arrowhead next to the word stroke to make sure that you can see everything up to the profile feature. If you can't find any of these panels, you want to go to Window and then find them alphabetically in the drop-down menu. Next to all of this, I have another hidden set of panels. I have Transform, Align, and Pathfinder nestled in one group, and then a Properties panel nestled right underneath it. This is all I'll need to create this isometric spice rack. Now, as I explore my layers, you can see that I already have an isometric layer here. And if you open it up and expand it, you may find that I've left you some little artifacts. And what this is, it's just a group of paths, 4 lines and 2 groups for the squares, that capture the full dimensions of the spice rack you see in your orthographic, meaning that the full height and the full width left and right are captured within this bounding box. So if we created a little cardboard box for our spice rack for packaging and gifting, it would fit into this neat little cyan rectangle box just perfectly. Okay, this is going to help when I space this within my paper because I'll be able to use Illustrator's document settings to figure out the exact center for this shape, right? Now, you can go ahead and just keep these lines and groups that I've created for you, or what I'd like you to do is actually just follow along and see how I did this so you can understand how to do this on your own. All right. What I'm going to do is I need to create the square base for this box, and that means I have to create a length and a width at a 30-degree angle according to these measurements. Now, the total length of my spice rack from back to front is 1.5 plus 3/4. It's 2.5 inches. So what I'll do is I'll take my line tool or backslash on your keyboard, and I'll click anywhere in this white space on the right side of my paper. I'm going to just simply left click so that I get this pop-up menu. Just a simple single left click. And in here I'll put the total length, which is going to be 2.5 inches, and an angle of 30 degrees. Now, remember, if you are making a new line and you are left clicking and you don't see inches as your units, you could always pull up your rulers, which is Command R on your keyboard, and then right click on the ruler to switch your units into your desired working unit, in this case inches. Now, I could go ahead and just create that same line at a different angle, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to just take that one line at 30 degrees and I'm going to reflect it twice. I'll reflect it once across vertically by selecting the line with my direct selection tool, or V on your keyboard. I'll then switch over to my reflect tool. Your reflect tool is nestled underneath your rotate tool, or if you want to remember the shortcut key for that, it's O. And just think of O as the only one of the only symmetrical letters in the alphabet. All right. Now that I have that selected with my reflect tool, you'll see the crosshairs pop up, and this is going to establish where the axis of symmetry is. And right now it's indicated by this cyan crosshair in the middle of the line. I don't want to reflect it across here. I want to reflect it across this starting point. So I'm going to hover over it so that my smart guide says anchor. And if you don't see the word anchor in magenta, it's because your smart guides are not enabled. You'll need to enable this by going to View, Smart Guides, and then clicking it off. If you'd like to remember the shortcut key for that, it is Control on a PC or Command U. You can remember that as Command U for you are smart. Smart Guides. Okay, so with that enabled, I'm going to hover over that point. It should say anchor to represent the anchor point. It's snapped. And I'm going to hold Option or Alt on a PC, and then left click on that point so that I get this dialog box. And as you can see, it's already reflected it because my preview is checked off. It's reflecting across the vertical axis, which is what I want. If it was on horizontal, it would be going upside down, going the other direction, which is what I don't want. So I'm going to keep it vertical, and I'm going to make sure to copy it. So I should have this V shape, the two 30-degree angles going left and right for the two front edges of my box. I'm going to take these two lines, and now I'm going to reflect it again, but now via the horizontal axis. So selecting both with the direct selection tool, and then O on my keyboard for the reflect tool. Remember, O is a symmetrical letter, it represents a mirror. And then I'm going to hold Alt and then click on either the left or the right point of these lines so that I get the dialog box. And again, I don't want it to be vertical, I want it to be horizontal this time. And once I see that happen, I'm going to hit copy. So now I have my isometric square. All right, I can take these 4 points and I can either group them or join them. In this case, I'm going to group them together so it makes a clean square. Okay. Now I'm going to move the square to the total height of the box. So I have to add up all of these numbers from the very bottom. That's 1/4 plus 3 1/4. That's 3 1/2. 3 3/4, 4. Looks like it's 4 1/4 high. Let me just add it again. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. That's 1 inch. This is going to be 1 inch plus 3 1/4. That is 4 1/2. So sorry, 4 1/4. Okay, so from each of these corners on the square, I have to make a line that is 4 1/4 long. But let me just start by taking this square and doing the top half. I'm just going to take this group of lines that I have here, and I'm going to move it. I'm going to displace it exactly 4 1/4 inches high. Remember that to move anything with the desired amount or desired increment, all you do is select the object you want to move and then hit Return or Enter on your keyboard. The Move dialog box will appear. And this will only appear, let me cancel this, this will only appear if you are currently on the direct selection tool. You have to be on the direct selection tool with an object selected to be able to move it. If you are on any drawing tool or any other tool within Illustrator and you try to do Return or Enter on a Mac, you will not get the Move tool, okay? It won't appear. So make sure that you are on the Select tool, you have the object selected, and then hit Enter or Return. The horizontal movement is going to stay 0. The vertical movement is going to be the height of our box, which is 4 1/4, 4.25. Let me check and uncheck the preview button. And I can see that's going downwards, okay? That's because any positive number in Illustrator is pushing something downwards away from the 0, 0 corner of your page. The 0, 0 corner is the top left corner of your paper. I want this to move upwards, so I'm going to change that vertical increment into a negative value so that it goes up. You could also change the angle instead to just be a positive 90-degree angle, so that it would go upwards in direction. Repeat that a couple times, and then I'll hit copy. Okay. Now I'm just going to create the edges for this box. And if this is done correctly, these lengths should be exactly 4 1/4. And I see that on the pop-up gray box next to my cursor. It says distance 4.25, and that is perfect. Okay. I'm just going to press V on my keyboard to take my selection tool. I'm going to Option, click, and hold, dragging them to the other corners, trying to get them to snap in place. Okay. And if they don't snap, I'm going to just drop it, release it, grab it by the corner, and then place it onto the corner. Grabbing and move something by its point, by its tip, and then placing it on an exact point is way more accurate than grabbing it in the middle of the object and just hoping that the two ends touch like this. Okay. This is harder to get to be accurate. Better to just grab it by the tip using the direct selection, using the regular selection tool, not the direct selection tool, and just placing it on the point itself. Do the same thing one more time. I'm just going to Option, click and drag this over, release it, and then grab it by the point and place it here. So now I have a full isometric box, and all of these pieces together can be grouped and renamed box. It could be called construction box, it could be spice rack box, whatever you want, but this is just the box. The last thing I'll do with this box is I'm actually going to make it into guides so that I don't confuse it with being my object. And to make any sort of path into guides, all you do is you go to View, Guides, and you make them into guides. They should be selected first, of course. So by making them guides, they will turn cyan, and these will behave like any other guides on my artboard, meaning that if I go to View, Guides, Unlock Guides, they will unlock and I'll be able to move them around. Okay. If I were to lock them that way too, they would also lock along with any other horizontal or vertical guides that I have. So how are we going to space this out accurately? Let's see what we're going to do. We're going to place a guide at the either top of our page or at the top margin, just that top borderline there. Another horizontal guide at the bottom margin line. And this I'm just dragging the guide out from the ruler to place. I'm going to grab another guide out from the vertical ruler on the left side. I'm going to put all the way to the title block here. Okay. And if you accidentally miss it, I can just Control Z to undo it. That's probably the easiest thing. I'll try that again and snap that to there. Then snap it again to the outer margin on the right side. Okay, I want to center this box to these 4 guides. So what I'll do is I'll make sure to unlock my guides, view, guides, unlock guides, and I never remember the shortcut, so I don't recommend that you do, but it's Alt Control semicolon. And I'm going to center this by selecting first the horizontal guides. So I'm going to select the top guide by just marking over it. I'm going to hold Shift and then select the bottom guide. So you see that the 2 guides that I have selected have turned green. That's the color of the layer that they're in. So they're always going to turn or highlight in the color of the layer they're in. I'm going to click on the isometric box by holding Shift again so that I'm adding to my selection. And so now I have the 2 horizontal guides and the isometric box selected. With this, I can now align the box to be perfectly distanced between those 2 guides. All I need to do is open up my Align window, which I have nestled up here. I need to look for distribute spacing. So distribute spacing 2, it'll take the 2 outer limits, like the highest point and the lowest point, in this case the upper guide and the lower guide, and we'll take whatever's in the middle and distribute the spacing evenly. If I had multiple items here, it would distribute that spacing evenly between all those different items. But here I just have 1 box, so it's going to put the equal amount of space at the top and at the bottom. Let's see what it does. Okay, as you can see, this looks very bottom heavy because of the title block here and how it approaches it. Instead, what I'll do is I'll take that guide and I'll move it up to the top of the title block, and I'll do that same thing. I'll select both horizontal guides by marking over it, and then Shift click on the box so that all 3 are selected. I'll distribute the spacing this way, and this looks a lot better. Finally, I need to distribute the vertical spacing. So again, I'll do the same thing. I'll mark over the 2 vertical guides on left and right. I'll then hold Shift and select the box in the middle. I'll then distribute the spacing vertically, or horizontally, sorry. You see nothing much happened there because it was already pretty centered, but if this was over to the left over like that, and clearly it was not centered, I could do the same thing. 2 guides, click the box, and bam. Okay, it's within this box that we will create our spice rack. So moving forward, let me just grab the box and all of these guides and put them in a sub-layer of the ISO layer, and I'm going to call this guides. So the ISO layer is going to have its own set of guides. To move all of these objects into this sub-layer, I can either shift select the top object, then shift select the bottom object, and then drag them in. You could also have them selected in your artboard and then drag the square that they belong to. In this case, they belong to the general ISO layer, and you can drag that square into the more specific sublayer of guides. So I'm just clicking and dragging that square because they're all within it, and I'm dragging it into guides, and that moves it all into that one sublayer there. I'm going to lock that sublayer. Go back to my layer name, and I'm going to create a new sublayer, calling this one object. Okay. While I'm at it, I'll create another sublayer. I'll call this construction. We'll see what we'll do with that later. Okay. So we're going to start this from the ground up, and you really want to approach this the same way that you did with your isometric pyramid. What you're doing is you're trying to translate what you see in the plan into the distorted isometric view of 30 degrees, and you're going to elevate all of your plan elements up in height according to your elevations. So starting from the very base, I have this rounded square. How am I going to do that? I'm going to create a flat square from my orthographic, or you could literally copy your square from your orthographic that you have in your done already. In this case, I don't, so I'm going to create a new one. And to create the square, I'm actually just going to create a simple rounded rectangle. I'm not going to create a rectangle tool and then round it after. I'm just going to do it all at once. This will be a lot easier. In my object sublayer, I will enable the rounded rectangle tool, and then I will click on my artboard so that I see the dialog box. When you are building shapes or paths in Illustrator, if you select the tool and then simply left click, you'll always get this dialog box where you can input specific values. In this case, I'm putting in the width and the height of this rounded rectangle, the corner radius, which I see here in the bottom left corner, of 0.25 inches. This looks good. I should get the same thing that I see in my orthographic. Okay. What I'll do with this rounded square is I'm actually going to distort it into my box here. With the object selected, I'm going to go over to my toolbar and find my transform tool, my free transform tool, which is E on your keyboard. Within this free transform tool, once it is clicked, you have the option to distort or put things into perspective. In this case, I'm not using optical perspective or linear perspective for drawing. I'm using isometric, and because of that, I'm going to have to freely distort these corners into place. So I'm going to take the very last tool here, the free distort tool, and I'm going to move over to my object, take these corners, and then drag them to the corners of this box. And this is why smart guides are important, because you should see them snap to the word anchor, meaning that it's snapping to the anchor point of the box guide. There we go. And if this is distorted correctly, let me just leave that one for now. Let me take this right one. If this is distorted correctly, it'll preserve the lengths, but also preserve the rounded corners that we need in this rounded rectangle base. Okay. So as you've seen, I've just placed my very first shape at the very, very bottom level here of the elevation, ground zero right here. Okay. I'm going to give it some depth, and I'm going to give it the depth of the elevation, which is 1/4 inch. So I'll select that rounded square, and I'll hit Return or Enter on my keyboard to do the specific movement of 0 horizontal and 0.25 vertical, and then I'll copy it upwards. I meant to do that upwards. Let me undo that. And just remember my mistake there. Because I want to move upwards in this case, it has to be a negative value. Let's preview that a couple of times, and there we go. Copy that, and that's going to be placed right there. Okay. Now, before I move any more forward, I want to close off the shape, okay? I want to have the 2 vertical sides along here, and I want to be able to fill that whole band with white, meaning I want to cover up these curves down here. If I just draw 2 line segments regularly on the sides here, I won't be able to fill up this space with white because it's not a closed shape. So I won't be able to fill this with white to hide this edge that shouldn't be visible from this view. Okay? You may think, okay, well then I would just delete this anchor point and have it close off, but there's actually a very precise and clean way that we like to do this within technical illustration, and I'll show that to you right now. Let's close up on this corner here, and let me just select this rounded corner, and you can notice that I have 2 anchor points at this corner for the roundedness of this rounded rectangle. I have them vertically stacked over each other, one above and one below, which gives me this radius curve. To do the line that attaches here and create a filled shape, I have to add an anchor point right in the middle of this curve. So what I'll do is I'll press plus on my keyboard, and plus is the add anchor point tool. And with that anchor point tool, my add anchor point tool, I'm going to hover over the arc until I find the intersection with the center of the square. So if I just hover over it, it should say intersect, and see the relationship it has with the center object, with the square itself. That pink line goes to the center of that rounded rectangle. That's what I want. I want to hit right there. I want to do the same thing for the bottom square. And you'll see that it should say intersect as well. It should be vertically stacked or aligned with the first point that I just added right above it. I'm going to go over to the other side and do the same thing. Let me just select both of these squares, and then I'll press plus on my keyboard and hover over so I see intersect, and go down and see intersect again. Great. So I've now modified the paths to have anchor points on either side, the left and the right side. What I'm going to do now is using my direct selection tool. So A on your keyboard. I'm going to click on this edge, and I'm actually going to click on the first anchor point before the one that I added. So not the one that's in the middle of this arc, but the one right after, right here. I'm going to click on this, hold shift, and then click on the next one, the one after that, and finally the one on the opposite side. Okay, so I have 4 anchor points selected all along the bottom part of that square. I'm going to do the same thing on the same points underneath. One at the corner here, one down here, here, and here. I'm just holding shift while I click on all of these so that I add all those points together. And what I'm selecting is the points, not the shape itself. So I'm just selecting only the points along this bottom path of the routed rectangle. Now that they're selected, I'm going to Control or Command C, which is like a copy command. And then I'm going to Control Shift V to paste it in place. It's the same thing as going to Edit, Paste in place. You see the shortcut there? Shift Control or Command V. And what happened? If I open up my object sublayer, I see that I have 2 paths here, stacked one over the other, which has all of the points that I selected plus the next point after it. Remember, I didn't select this side point, I selected the one right before it, but because the line is attached to that point, it is added in with that selection. Okay. What I have to do is I have to close off the shape. Now let me just try this. I'm going to select these 2 paths, and I know they're selected because both of the squares for the 2 paths are both filled in with the layer color. I'm going to try joining them, and this is really important. Okay. I'm going to hit Control or Command J for join. This is not the same thing as Control or Command G for grouping. What does grouping do? Grouping just groups any selected paths into an attached object. They're all linked together. Joining actually closes off a shape for it to be closed. So it fills in the gap between anchor points to close off the shape. So right now I have these 2 V shapes, and I want to close off the gap on either side. If I select them and hit Control or Command J, you see on the right side what happened? That line filled in. It joined the empty anchor points together. If I hit it again, it should do it on the only other empty hole, which is on the left side. So now I have a filled shape here. I have a solid path that is closed off. I have a closed path. Because I have a closed path, I can fill this now with white. And you see that those inner lines disappear. I can do the same thing with the top of this rounded rectangle and fill it with white. And that is my actual base for my spice rack. Okay. What am I going to do with this? I'm going to select all those pieces within my layers by selecting the circle next to those paths. So I have 3 of them. I have the bottom square, the top square, and then the band that runs around the side. I'm going to group these together, right click on them, and call them base. Immediately what I'll do is I'll move this base up to its location as the lid of the spice rack, because the same rounded square is also situated on top of all of these shelves. And that distance is 3 1/4 plus the distance of the base itself. So I'm going to move it a total of 3.5 inches. I'll select that base, I'll hit return or enter on my computer, and then I'll put in a vertical movement of negative, because I'm going up, 3.5 inches. Preview it, and then hit copy. Okay. This object in my layers panel is going to be called lid. And I'm just going to hide it and lock it for now while I build the shelves. Now, in order to build the shelves, what I have to do is I have to create some sort of grid here so that I can accurately place them and shape them to the 30-degree angle. Okay. The grid that I want to work with is going to account for the spacing from the edge of the square to the shelf itself, and also the depth of the shelf, which is also the same distance. So it's going to be a 1/4 inch grid from the very edge, the front edge of the spice rack, going towards the back. I'm going to make lines that are a 1/4 inch of the distance apart until I reach the very end to give me 2.5. So going back here, I'm going to go into my construction sublayer, and I'm going to get my line tool or backslash on my keyboard, and I'll draw a red line. So I'm just going to change my stroke color to red, and I'm going to draw a line that goes from corner to corner at the bottom of my spice rack, just so I get the full distance accurate. Okay, once I drew that, I'm going to click and drag it while holding shift up to the top edge here. Okay, and I can't see it exactly, so I'm going to open up my base group here, take that band and actually remove its fill. So now I can see that my line is lined up with the actual edge. Now that I have this construction layer, let me actually move it above the object. That will help too. Okay, that's better. And I'm going to switch that band back to white. Okay. With this line now, I'm going to move it that 1/4 inch distance along 30 degrees. So hitting enter on my keyboard or return on a Mac, I'm going to put in not a horizontal value or vertical value. I'm going to put in a distance of 0.25 at 30 degrees. It should slide over in parallel, the exact same length, a 1/4 inch away from its starting point. Let me preview it by clicking on the checkbox, and that is the movement I want. I want it to end on the line and start on the other edge in front perfectly. So I'm going to copy that. And as we know, whenever we do a movement within Illustrator, as long as we don't make another movement right after, we can hit Control or Command D to duplicate that movement all the way till the end. Okay, so I have 1/4 inch increments going all the way from the front left to the back right of the isometric base. I see that in my construction layer here. I'm going to select all of these lines by clicking on the circle for the construction layer, and I'm going to group them. I'm going to reflect this in the other direction so that I have a grid. So with it selected, I'm going to hit O on my keyboard for the reflect tool, and I'm going to click in the center where the crosshair already is while holding Option. Now, again, I'm not on a drawing tool, so I can't just left click. I have to hold Option whenever I'm doing a transform action. And by holding Option, I will get this dialog box, which will ask me what axis I want to reflect on. In this case, vertical or horizontal will work, but I want to make sure that I copy it. And this will give me an isometric grid of 1/4 inch increments. So now I have the two groups within this construction layer. Okay, and you can take those two groups by shift clicking on the circles and Control or Command G to group them as one. Okay, remember the difference here. I grouped them now. I didn't join them. So this this grid here, this group here moves around together, but the actual points are not attached to each other, and they can't receive a fill color the way that a closed shape would. Okay. Grouping and joining are two different things. Just move that back. Okay, now that I have this grid in place, I can create my shelf because I know exactly where it's placed. It's placed one grid tile away from the edge in both directions, and it's going to be a total quarter of 4 tiles long by 1 tile wide. So my shelf is going to exist right here. And I'm going to go back to my object layer. Let me just lock that construction layer and go back to my object layer. And in here, I'm just going to take my pen tool in this case. And I'm going to click on those 4 corners. Okay, the first corner is 1 grid tile away from the very front corner. It's 4 squares over, 1 square back, and then coming back towards the front right, it's 4 squares, and then closing off to make that rounded rectangle. Okay. It's hard to see because of the construction layer there. There we go. If I just hide the visibility of it, I can see where I placed it. Okay. Now I'm not going to go so far as to build the other 3. I'm just going to build this one. And because they're all the same, I'll show you the power of symbols and how they can be used to streamline our workload, but also defend ourselves against any mistakes that need corrections in the future. All right, so I'm just going to make this one shelf to start. Now that I have its full width and length, I have to give it some height. It's the total height from the very top of the base to the underside of the lid, and it's given by this measurement 3 1/4. So from the 4 corners of this rectangle, I'm going to create a height of 3 1/4. I'll click on the left back corner with my line tool, backslash on your keyboard, and I'll put in the length of 3.25, going at an angle of 90 degrees. Okay. Now that same line should exist in the front. Option click, hit OK. Option click on the right corner, hit OK. Option click on the back left corner, hit OK. The top of the shelf should have the same isometric rectangle touching those 4 corners. I'm just going to click on the bottom rectangle, hold Option, hold Shift, and then drag it up until I get to the top of those lines. It should say intersect as my smart guide. Okay. I have this shape. Now the issue here is that, just like before, what I showed you is that this is not a closed shape, meaning I can't fill it because it's only open path, a straight line. If I try to give it a color as a fill color, nothing would happen. So I actually want to join the 2 sides. I want to join this left side and this front edge together to make a completed rectangle. But I also want to do it on this side too, from this edge in the center to this edge on the right. So I'm going to have to use this edge twice. So I'm going to copy it with Control or Command C, or Edit Copy, and then paste it in place, Control or Command Shift V. So now I have 2 lines stacked over each other. You saw it got a little bit thicker. I'll select once, and then select on either the left or the right edge, and then do Control or Command J to join them. Okay, you don't see anything happen, but the paths are actually joining along the bottom and then at the top. And so now if I select this rectangle and select a white fill, it should fill up with white. Okay. This line is visible because it is layered above this shape. Let me just change that layer structure and put this on top. There we go. Okay, let me lock that and then go back to this center front edge. Because that rectangle is locked, I should be able to select this edge easily and then select the right edge as well. And again, I want to join it so that the top edge and the bottom edge become completed. To test that I did this correctly, if I fill it with white, those hidden geometry that's behind the object should disappear. I can finish this off by turning the top rectangle here, bringing it above in layer structure, and also filling it with white. Now, what I'll do with this is I'll actually take these 3 shapes. I'll take all the shapes associated with the spice rack, and I'm going to move it into my symbols panel. What the symbols panel is going to do is going to capture this drawing as sort of a sticker or an icon. And whatever edit I make to it, it'll automatically update any instance of the sticker or icon in my drawing. So even though this isn't complete, as soon as I do complete it, all my other instances will update as well. Let's just try it out. I'm going to take all these pieces that belong to this shelf that I just built. And there I just click the top piece, held shift and then clicked on the circle for the bottom piece. I want to take everything, even the hidden lines that are behind the object, and I want to click, hold, and drag it into my symbols panel and call this shelf. Don't worry about any of these other settings. They're just related to old school Flash animation techniques. We just need to make sure that we name it so we can identify it. And you'll see that rectangle box pop up in my symbols panel as a shelf. Okay. Immediately, I can go back to my construction grid, show it, and then place this in the correct location. So this same rectangular shelf exists in the back corner, facing in the same direction. I'm going to select the symbol, hold Option, drag it off. I'm going to find the back corner of this symbol. I'm going to stack it right over this corner here, and it should fit within again. Should fit there. 1, 2, 3. Did I do that right? Why does it look like it only fills up 2, 3, 2, 3? Did I not make this wide enough? I didn't make this wide enough. That's okay. Let me just place this behind. I made a clear mistake. I didn't make this wide enough. It should go up to 4 squares long. And so I'm actually going to double click on this symbol. And now you'll see the power of symbols. Because this isn't wide enough, I have to take this edge and drag it out to this point here. I'm going to have to take this edge and drag it out to this point here. Watch what happens when I exit the symbol. By double-clicking off of the object, this symbol also updated to match its width because every instance of this symbol is exactly the same. Now I can take this corner and place it right there. It should go up and fill up those 4 points precisely. I'll take these 2 symbols and I'll also place them on the other 2 corners, but I'll select both of them, shift selecting the second one, and then I will actually reflect them using O or the reflect tool on my keyboard. I'll go to the crosshair location that it's currently in, and I'll hold Alt and click to reflect it vertically to see what happens. Okay, so if I copy these, they're oriented the right way, but I don't place them in the right position. I have to drag this one out to the very tip of the right, just 1 square away from the right sides, and do the same thing with this block, placing it 1 square away from the left edges of my lid. Okay. The only thing wrong here is the layer order. So this one, we'll call this left, back. This one, we'll call it back. This one, we'll call it front. It'll be in the front. This one, we'll call it right. I'll put the 3 of these things within a sublayer called shelves. So these 4 are going to be dragged into shelves. Let me hide my construction grid. Now, what are they all missing? They're missing the 4 holes that run through them through the center. Again, to do this, I'm going to do it within one symbol and everything else should update automatically. I'm going to double click on my front symbol. I'm going to expand it in the layers. I'm going to create another set of construction grids here so I can space the circles properly. This construction grid is going to have a red line. It's going to start at the very bottom. It's going to trace over this lid from corner to corner, making sure to snap to each corner. I'm now going to move it upwards by hitting return on my keyboard, a distance of 0 horizontal and 0.25 vertical, negative 0.25. Oops. And that should move it upwards. I want to copy that and then repeat that movement by hitting Command or Control D. Okay. I'm now going to create a set of vertical guides on the side, just going from top corner to bottom corner. And then I'm going to move this one a distance of 0.25 at an angle of negative 30. Let's see what that looks like. That's it. So I'm going downwards in direction. Okay, let me preview that. Yeah, it should slide over downwards towards the right. I'll hit copy and then I'll hit Command D. I'll tap that 2, 3 times to get my wall grid for this shelf. Let me lock that construction now. The placement of these holes is that it is a 1/4 inch from the bottom with a 1/4 inch spacing between each hole and then a 1/4 inch spacing at the top. Each hole itself is 1/2 inch in diameter. A 1/2 inch is the equivalent of 2 by 2 squares in this, centered to the shelf wall itself. So for this, what I'm going to do is I will take my ellipse tool, L on your keyboard for ellipse. I'm going to make a regular circle, and just like I did with my rounded rectangle, I'll draw it flat squares. I'll draw it flat first, and then I'll distort it into the correct area. So with my shelf layer selected, I'm going to just simply left click on my artboard, put in the diameter value of 0.5 by 0.5, and then hit OK. Nice. Let me switch this to my object line. I'm now going to distort this into its location right here. So with my free transform tool and then my free distort tool, I'll drag the corners into place. Okay. And then I will deselect by selecting my regular selection tool and clicking off. What I have here is I have the front ellipse for the hole, but this has depth, and that depth is a 1/4 of an inch through, where I'll have a second hole behind. Now because I have 2 of these curves showing depth, it's very likely that I'm going to see an inside curve here as well to make it be communicated as a whole. So what I have to do is I have to take this circle that I just drew and distorted. I have to hit return or enter on my keyboard to get the move panel, and I have to move it back in space 30 degrees. So I'm going to move it a distance of 0.25, which is the thickness of the shelf, and I'm going to move it 30 degrees in this case. Positive 30. I'm going to preview that. So you see where it's going? It's going to the back side of the shelf. It's being pushed back. I'm going to copy it, and you see what's going to happen is that that back ellipse is going to be visible through the front ellipse in this portion here. I just need this portion here. So I need to get rid of all of this external part. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the front circle and I'm going to make a duplicate of it by Command C, copying it, and then Command Shift V, pasting it in place. So now I have 2 of those ellipses. I'll select that front ellipse again, whichever one, whether it's the new one or the old one, and I'll shift select the back ellipse. What I want to get out of this is this intersecting shape here in the middle. And to do this, I'll go to Pathfinder. Okay. In the Pathfinder panel, you have very important tools for combining, subtracting, and intersecting shapes with an Illustrator. We have the Unite tool, the Subtract tool, and the Intersect tool. And in this case, I want to intersect those two ellipses to be left with this sort of pointed oval shape in the center. I'll select the Intersect tool, and you see what I get there. I get the back shape on the other side of this hole. Now that my hole is complete, I'm going to group these two objects together. I'm going to rename it hole. And I'll even create a symbol out of it in case I want to edit this or make some sort of adjustment to this later. I'll drag this into my symbols panel by clicking on it in the artboard, not in the layers. Dragging it into that panel and calling it hole. Okay. Now that my hole is cleanly drawn for my spice rack, I'm going to select it and then move it up into the corresponding distances. I need to move up. I believe I need to move up 1, 2, 3. I need to move up 0.75 inches to get it to be in the right place. So with that selected, I'm going to hit return on my keyboard, put in a horizontal distance of 0 and a vertical distance of 0.75, make that negative so it goes up. Preview it twice. There we go. I should just have one row of space between the two. I'm going to hit copy, and then I'm going to hit Command D to duplicate it third and a fourth time, leaving another row of squares at the very top here. Let me hide that construction. Very good. Okay. Now that that construction is built, I'm going to just move this off, lock it, and hide its visibility. And I'm going to double click outside of the shelf itself. I'm not going to click in here or here. I'm going to click off into the white space of my artboard to exit the symbol, and look what happened. Because every shelf is an instance of that original shelf, because I drew the holes in that original shelf, all the other instances updated to place them in the exact same locations. And that is the most accurate way to get all of the shelves where they need to be in the spice rack. Okay. I could go and double check this, but let me just tell you with my expert opinion that these are correct. This is how it should look. Okay. I previously hid the lid of my spice rack, but let's see what happens when I bring it back. Okay, I have to restructure this. I'm going to place this over my shelves here. And that should be its location in relation to the 4 shelves. There should be a bit of an overhang. See, as I highlight the shelf here, there's some distance away from the corner, and that's important. That's actually correct because there is a bit of an overhang from the shelf nearest to that edge, nearest to that corner. If I wanted to see this in X-ray view, what you could do is hit Control or Command Y on your keyboard to enter what's called Outline View. An outline view strips away all appearances and just makes things into their hairline strokes, so you can look for precision mistakes like, in my shelf here, these lines don't exactly match up. Let me double click on that, go in here, okay, Command Control Y. Yeah, this is slightly off. Let's see if we can get this to hit accurately. Boom. Nice, Control Command Y. I'm back out here, okay? You see these little sharp corners here? This is something that you can also adjust. If I double click on this shape and I go over to my stroke panel, there's a different corner type within this set. And I'm going to switch it to a round join instead of a miter join to smooth out that corner. I'll do the same thing with the other corners here on this path. Click on this one, shift click on the front one, and then hit on round join to round out those corners nicely. Okay, the only 2 elements to make now are the 2 discs at the top of the spice rack. For this, I'm going to need this construction grid again, but I have to move it up to the very top of this shelf. So let me actually take this group and create a duplicate of it by Control C, which is copying it, and then Control or Command Shift V to paste it in place. Okay, let me lock the original bottom one and hide it, and then let me move this copy upwards the total height of the shelf, which is 3¼ plus the height of the lid, which is another quarter. So I'm moving this a total of 3.5 inches vertically, or positive 90 degrees. Yeah, so it's going to sit at the top of my spice rack, and I hit copy. Okay, now with this grid on the top here, I can accurately place my ellipse in its location on the center of this. It needs to be spaced out ½ inch away from the edges. So I have to count 2 rows of tiles in from the edges to make that ellipse. I'm just going to draw the ellipse normally in my object layer to be the full diameter of this, which is going to be 1½ inches. Let me left click off on my artboard and put in the diameter of 1.5 and 1.5 and hit OK. Now what do? I take the shape, I'm going to switch it to my object appearance, and I'm going to distort it into place. Let me just bring it over here. I'm going to select my transform tool, E on my keyboard. I'm going to switch to the free transform tool. And I'm going to drag these corners 2 tiles away from the edges, snapping them so that they say counter 1, 2, 2, and 1, 2. That's an isometric ellipse of the correct dimension of 1/2 by 1/2, or 6 by 6 tiles. Okay. While I'm here, let me make this smaller ellipse too. The small ellipse has a diameter of ½ inch. So I'm going to put in a ellipse on my keyboard, left click, put in 0.5 by 0.5 for the diameter, width and height. And then I'm going to place this one in the center here so that it is also an additional 2 by 2 tiles away from the edges of the bigger circle. E on my keyboard for my transform tool, click on the free transform tool, and drag these corners. I should have moved this closer when I did this, but I'm having 1, 2 away from the outer circle. 1, 2. In the end, this circle should fill up a 2 by 2 square in your grid, 2 by 2. Yeah, just like that. Okay, let me hide those construction grids. And now all I have to do is move these things up in space and give them depth. Let me lock my shells. Let me lock all of these text layers that I used for notes. Let me just focus on these 2 circles here. Okay, starting with the smaller circle. Let me move it up to total height. The total height that it moves up, it needs to move up a full ½ inch to be at the bottom ellipse. So I'm going to select that smaller circle, hit return or enter my keyboard, and then do a vertical movement of negative 0.25, making sure that it goes up a positive angle of 90 degrees, and hitting OK. I'm not going to copy it, I just need that one. All right? Let me do it again. Selecting that circle, and it needs to move up another ½ inch. So I'm just going to select that circle again and hit Control D to repeat that movement. I should have copied it. Okay, I'm going to hit return on my keyboard. The same measurements are still there, but now I'm going to say copy. So I have the 2 circles stacked over each other. Let me do the same thing with this bigger circle. Select this bigger circle, hit enter return, and do a vertical movement of 0.25, 90 degrees upwards, and copy it. Okay, those are the 2 pairs of ellipses for the cylinders at the top of this spice rack. I have to do the same thing that I did here. I have to connect them with a straight line at their extremities. And if I look at this bottom ellipse as an example, if I use my direct selection tool by pressing A on my keyboard, I'll see that once again my anchor points are not situated at the edge of those curves, they're situated right before them, stacked over each other. So I have to add anchor points on either ends of this circle. And if I were smart, I would have done that before I duplicated it, so that way it would have just copied over. But we're here now. So I'm going to hit plus on my keyboard, and then with plus, I'm going to hover over these arcs until I see intersect. And that intersect is important because it tells me that it's aligned with the center of that ellipse. I'm going to go to the other side. I find the same thing. I'm going to go above until I see the same thing. It's both vertically and then horizontally aligned with the center. Go to the other side. It should also say intersect. Okay. For these two curves, what I have to do is I have to select the two bottom anchor points. This one here, and this one on the opposite side. Same thing here. Find that anchor point and this anchor point. So 4 anchor points are selected. Why only 4? Because we know that the edge that comes after that anchor point is included in the selection. Okay? Not just the up to the point, but all of the path connected to that point is included in the selection, which would bring me all the way up to the sides here. So these 4 anchor points are selected. I'm going to copy them with Command or Control C, and then Command or Control Shift V to paste them in place. Immediately, I'll try joining them by switching over to my selection tool and just hitting Command or Control J for join, J for joindre, not group. Okay, if I do a join, I should see a line appear that connects the two open paths together, and I see that on the other side. If it's done correctly, when I fill it with white, okay, that back geometry should disappear, and I should be able to give this top ellipse a white fill as well. Same thing now with just this final chapeau to the spice rack, this little dole that is probably the pivot point for this whole thing. I'm going to start by adding anchor points to the sides of this ellipse. One on the left side, one right below, on the right side, and right above. I'm going to select 2 anchor points at the bottom of each of these curves. So I have 4 total selected. I'm going to hit Command or Control C, and Command or Control Shift V to paste in place. Then Command or Control J to join them, and then again for the other side. Oh no, what happened there? I joined to the wrong point. Okay, I didn't put an anchor. This is why the anchor point in that center is so important. Without it, when I did that selection and I pasted it, I missed it and I went all the way up to the next anchor point. So let me undo that. Let me undo the join. Let me add an anchor point right here to the side. Let me subtract this extra bit that I don't want it to join to by hitting minus and then clicking on that point. Okay. Let me select the path again, V on my keyboard, regular select this whole path and hit Command or Control J to join it, and it should close off nicely and cleanly. Give it a white fill. Give the top ellipse a white fill as well. And hey, look at that. You've made the spice rack.